I now want to get into what we're calling the week in review. I have a lot of different topics that I want to cover, ones that really were worth covering, but as a show that really does just 2 at the most 3 topics a night, we often don't get to ones that we wish we could, and we're trying to use Friday night as the week in review to be able to cover those. And the second part of our show is going to be the Q&A, where we get questions from our locals members and try and answer them. But in this case, the topic I wanted to begin with just so happens to be one of the most common questions throughout the day we got from locals members, including this question from Christiana K., who asked this, quote, "I would love to hear your thoughts on today's arrest of Judge Hannah Dugan by the FBI." Now, this is one of the biggest topics, news topics of the day, certainly consuming a lot of news and a lot of commentary. It's also generating a lot of hysteria, a lot of inaccurate commentary as well. So I actually did want to address this. Just to give you the bare bones facts for those of you who haven't heard it, Judge Dugan is a local judge in the county of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. She's a judge in the state court system in Milwaukee, not a very high-ranking judge. In fact, at what I believe is one of the lowest levels of the judicial system. She was elected, and she's somebody who has spent a long time affiliated with working with low-income people, which I regard as noble, but also causes generally associated with the left, including immigrants. She was arrested by the FBI today at her home, and obviously that created a lot of shock because this was the FBI going and arresting a sitting judge in Wisconsin who clearly is a political opponent or someone with ideological views that differ from the administration. The arrest was originally announced by FBI Director Kash Patel, and a lot of people became instantly alarmed for reasons I guess are understandable, saying, oh wow, this is a huge escalation where the Trump administration is now arresting judges. And the implication was, especially from a lot of Democrats, I don't mean like Democratic random commentators, I mean from major Democratic Party leaders in DC and a lot of media personalities who are Democratic. They were essentially trying to claim that this was some huge red line that had just been crossed because this was an instance of the Trump administration now weaponizing the FBI to arrest judges for issuing orders they dislike. And if it were that, if this were the FBI, say, going to one of the judges that have been ruling against the Trump administration, issuing rulings that certain Trump administration policies are unconstitutional, or issuing injunctions, and the FBI went to their chambers or their home to arrest them as punishment for or a response to a judicial ruling that they issued in the course of their judicial work, I would be as alarmist as the English language permits. I would actually consider that to be a major escalation of the civil liberties threats that, as you, I think, know, I believe are genuine over the past 3 months that we're seeing. But that's not what happened today. This is not a case where this judge issued an adverse ruling, and for that reason the FBI went and arrested the judge, as a lot of people were attempting to imply. And I just want to note, it's not that uncommon for judges to be arrested. Judges commit crimes all the time. The FBI catches judges taking bribes or embezzling money or engaging in judicial corruption or on the state level election corruption. There are all sorts of judges who have been arrested, who have been prosecuted, who have been sentenced to prison, who are sitting in prison now. Judges are not any more above the law than anybody else. So the mere fact that the FBI arrested a judge doesn't make this a political scandal or a cause for alarm. Obviously, if a judge breaks into somebody's house and steals, if they rape somebody, if they're caught engaging in pedophilia, if they murder, et cetera, if they engage in tax evasion, if they're taking a bribe, they ought to be arrested and are arrested. It's really not out of the ordinary event. Not saying judges get arrested every day, but it's not that it happens once every century either. So the question then becomes, what was the reason for the arrest? What was the basis for the arrest? Was it as punishment for a judge who issued a ruling that the Trump administration disliked, which, as I said, would be on the far end of the extremist wing of what would justify alarmism, and that's what a lot of Democratic senators and other media figures tried to depict it as being to scare people. Oh, Trump is now arresting sitting judges. Obviously, there's a context for this, which is that the Trump administration has been very loud in its grievance about what they regard as the inappropriate rulings of federal judges, the excessive assertions of power over what the president is doing. And so they made it seem like, oh, now the Trump administration isn't just complaining about this, they're actually going and arresting them. And as I said, had it been that, I would spend my whole show on that. Not just this show, but many shows. But that's not what happened. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who supervises as Attorney General the FBI, went on to Fox News today, and this is the explanation she gave about the series of events that led the FBI to arrest Judge Dugan in Milwaukee.
And to set the stage for you and Sandra, this was truly horrific. This guy was in court being prosecuted by a state prosecutor for domestic violence battery. He had beat up two people, a guy and a girl, hit the guy 30 times, knocked him to the ground, choked him, beat up a woman so badly they both had to go to the hospital. And John, you know, it's so rare for victims to want to cooperate. They wanted to cooperate. They were sitting in the courtroom with the state prosecutor. The judge learns that ICE was outside to get the guy because he had been deported in 2013, came back in our country, commits these crimes, charged with committing these crimes, victims in court. Judge finds out. She goes out in the hallway, screams at the immigration officers. She's furious, visibly shaken, upset, sends them off to talk to the chief judge. She comes back in the courtroom. You're not going to believe this. Takes the defendant and the defense attorney back in her chambers, takes them out a private exit and tells them to leave, while a state prosecutor and victims of domestic violence are sitting in the courtroom.
Now, let me just issue an important caution, which is that Pam Bondi is a prosecutor. She's the Attorney General of the United States, the highest ranking prosecutor in the country. And the FBI is a law enforcement agency. And in our country, one of the responsibilities of citizenship is that we don't just assume that the version of events offered by the FBI or the police or the prosecutor is actually the full story, the accurate story, the correct story. So there's no chance I'm going to sit here and say, oh, this judge committed a crime. I want to hear from the judge. I want to hear from her lawyer. I want to see the evidence being examined and tested with witnesses in a court. And only then will at least I be willing to opine on whether there was really a crime committed here. But what is the case is that the FBI's theory, or the Attorney General, the DOJ's theory about why this judge got arrested, was that she committed what is in fact a crime, whether you think it should be or not, which is that if the government is looking for somebody in order to arrest them or detain them, and you do something actively to obstruct law enforcement from being able to find them, if you help the person escape, if you hide them, if you lie to law enforcement about where they are so that they don't find them, that's a crime in every state in the country and in a federal court. Now, there is a context here, an important context, which is we have this very odd situation in the United States where you have, on the one hand, the federal government that is charged with enforcing immigration laws. And this is not just under Trump. I mean, in fact, immigrant rights groups called Obama the deporter-in-chief. Obama deported millions of people who had entered the country illegally, millions. And that's done through Homeland Security, through ICE, and through the other agencies charged with enforcing immigration laws by finding and detaining and then deporting people who are in the country illegally. That's a legitimate function of the federal government. And then on the other hand, you have states and cities, and Milwaukee is an example of such a city, that have declared themselves to be sanctuary cities, by which they mean that if there's a person who's in the country illegally, who Milwaukee becomes aware of. For example, let's say there's a person who's in the country illegally and they're raped. and they call the police, and the police, in the course of talking to the person, discovers, oh, they're not a citizen, they're in the country illegally, the rape victim is. Or let's say that there's a murder on the street, and one of the witnesses is a person in the country illegally, and they go and talk to the police and tell the police what happened. And the police discover the person is in the country illegally, but still wants them to serve as a witness to this murder. Or let's say there's an older person in the country illegally, been here for a while, has a heart attack, a stroke, shows up at an emergency room in a public hospital. And in the course of getting their papers and the like, the medical staff, the hospital discovers they're in the country illegally. Ordinarily, if a government or law enforcement discovers that someone has committed a crime, they notify the relevant law enforcement agency, which would be ICE. Oh, we found this person. They are in the country illegally. Come get them. What a lot of cities have done, though, is declare themselves to be sanctuary cities because their argument is, we don't want people in our city who are in the country illegally to be hiding. We want them to come forward if they're a victim of a crime without fearing they're going to be detained. We want them to come forward if they're a witness to a crime. We want them to seek medical attention if they're, or someone in their family is in the middle of some serious medical crisis. That's a policy decision that cities and states, through their elected officials, have made. But you see the tension this creates. You have, on the one hand, the government searching for and wanting to detain and deport, especially now, people in the country illegally, but a lot of these people are in these so-called sanctuary cities where these states and cities have said, we're not going to help the federal government. That's the other things. Even if ICE finds out that there's some person in the country illegally they want to detain in, say, New York City or Chicago or Milwaukee, the police in those cities will not cooperate with ICE. They will not help help the federal government find illegal aliens. So this is a kind of passive policy. It's saying we're not going to help the federal government. We're not going to report people because we don't want people living underground, petrified that if they seek police help or medical help or send their kids to school, all things we want them to do, we don't want them petrified that we're going to turn them over the minute that they stick their head up. So that's already a strange conflict. That it's the policy of the federal government to find them and detain them and deport them, the policy of states and cities to basically harbor them, to give them sanctuary, as that says. And in that case, there's probably no real legal liability on the part of the state or the city, because what they're really saying in those cases is, we're just not going to help. We're not going to call the government. We're not going to snitch on these people. We're not going to tattle on them. We're not going to expend resources to turn them over. But the question becomes, what happens if a city official or a state official doesn't just passively refuse to help the federal government, but actively seeks to obstruct what they're trying to do? So ICE agents show up in New York City and say, hey, we know this person is here and we want to go get them. And then city officials say to the person that they're after, hey, come here, let's hide you because they're coming after you. Now, the city officials aren't just engaged in passive non-cooperation. They are instead engaged in active impediments, actively impeding or obstructing what the federal government under the law is attempting to do. And Trump's immigration czar, Tom Homan, this is one of the things he has said from the start, is if we find any city or state officials actively impeding or obstructing or harboring or hiding people in the country illegally that we're trying to detain and arrest, we will prosecute them because that is a crime. Let me just take it out of the immigration context for a second just to illustrate the point. Let's say there's somebody who robs a bank and you know they robbed a bank. You didn't help them rob the bank. You didn't even know they were going to rob the bank beforehand, but now you know they robbed the bank and that the police are after them. They're a fugitive from justice. If you tell the person, hey, come hide in my basement so that the police can't find you, or you give them money in a car to be able to flee, you are absolutely committing the crime, a crime of helping a fugitive flee justice, impeding or obstructing justice. These are just ordinary crimes. And I've confronted this many times before. In fact, when we went to Hong Kong to meet Edward Snowden to do the reporting, we were always very concerned about what was going to happen to him after he had to leave Hong Kong. Like, where was he going to go? We tried to talk about that to him about that. He said, I don't care about that. I'm not the issue. Work on the journalism and I'll take care of that myself. But we had felt like we had a responsibility to him. So I was working at The Guardian at the time. I called The Guardian. Their lawyers came to Hong Kong. We were talking about how we could help him. And the US government and the British government made very clear that if we take steps to try and hide Snowden, to help him get out of Hong Kong, to help him get to safety, they would regard our behavior as criminal because now we're aiding and abetting a fugitive from justice. This is not a radical theory of criminality that the Trump administration today invented in order to arrest this judge. So if this judge knew that ICE agents had come to the courthouse because the person they wanted to detain was in court as a criminal defendant accused of domestic assault and battery, which was the charge against him, and then the judge, upon learning that the ICE agents were out in the hallway, adjourned the proceeding in order to whisper to the defendant and his lawyer, hey, come here, come to my secret chambers. There's an exit that you should take. That's secret, that's private, that will allow you to get away. If that's really what she did, and again, I'm not assuming that she did that, but if that's really what she did, this does start to seem to me like more of an ordinary criminal offense than it does some political abuse of power designed to take retaliation against judges. If you did what that judge did, you would also get arrested. People have been arrested before for harboring or helping escape, not just criminals in general, but people in the country illegally as well. It's considered a crime. And the idea is just because she's a judge doesn't make what she did any less criminal, just like judges are arrested all the time for common crimes like bribery and all the other things I've said. So when I heard that a Trump administration, when I heard Kash Patel, as FBI director, go onto Twitter and say, we just arrested this federal judge, this state judge, I obviously was alarmed. Like the FBI arresting a judge in an immigration case seems like it has the potential for the abuse of power. But then once you hear the allegations, and there's affidavits and other things, you understand that at least if the set of facts alleged by the FBI is accurate, then this is far from the sort of political scandal that a lot of Democrats are trying to make it out to be. And this is the problem that I have with Democrats for a long time is one of the biggest gifts that they give to Trump is that they seem incapable ever of criticizing him without using maximalist language. Everything is a threat to democracy. Everything is fascism. Everything is Nazi-like or Hitler-like or some sort of drastic deviation from the norm, even when that's not true. And that creates the boy who cries wolf syndrome. I do think there are things the Trump administration is doing that are serious threats to basic civil liberties. We've talked about them a lot on this show. But the reason I feel competent to talk about them is because I am not somebody who has or will ever just instantly react to everything the Trump administration does with this deranged kind of chicken running around with its head cut off rhetoric that a lot of Democrats instantly use. And again, the problem is that if you call everything he does fascist or a threat to democracy, on the times he really does do those things, people will tune out that rhetoric. It's similar to overusing the racism accusation or the anti-Semitism accusation. If you just start throwing that around almost reflexively, people are going to tune it out so that when it really merits that term, it will have lost its impact. Same with a lot of this rhetoric. So there's so many Democrats sounded exactly the same today. Here is Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota in response to this story who wrote, quote, "This is not normal. The administration's arrest of a sitting judge in Wisconsin is a drastic move that threatens the rule of law. While we don't have all the details, this is a grave step and undermines our system of checks and balances." Okay. The act of arresting a sitting judge is not in and of itself a drastic move. Everything depends on what is it that she did or has said to have done that led to the arrest. So when she says, well, we don't have all the details, this is a grave step and undermines our system of checks and balances, no, it doesn't. Not if she actually took action that is plausibly within the realm of criminality. And so she's using this language in a way that's utterly inappropriate for the set of facts as we know them. Here's from Mark Levine, who's the Manhattan Borough President in New York. He went onto Twitter today. There was some Democratic operative from Media Matters who said Trump's FBI just arrested a sitting judge. No other details, just trying to make it seem like they're going around randomly arresting judges. And Mark Levine, the Manhattan Borough President, the Democrat, said this is North Korea level scary. Now, again, I think this rhetoric would be appropriate if this were being done as retaliation for some ruling that this judge issued. But if the judge did what they claim she did or anything like it, then this is totally inappropriate rhetoric. And I say that as someone who believes there are very grave civil liberties threats that have been posed by certain Trump administration policies. This just isn't one of them. And if the accusations are untrue, then they'll fall apart in a court. If this isn't really what the judge did, if she did something else besides what the FBI thinks she did or is claiming she did, that's what courts are for. But this is a case of actual criminal allegations based on an actual criminal statute that has been applied many times to many other people. And to use this kind of rhetoric instantly without knowing anything just, again, is what does Trump the biggest favors, because then when people like me, who are much more restrained with this kind of rhetoric and try and be much more discriminating about when we raise civil liberties concerns, like when it's actually deserved, when it really is something unprecedented, try and convince people that it's true, a lot of people will understandably tune out because this is the kind of language Democrats have been using for 10 years against Trump. From the smallest and most trivial stories to the biggest to everything in between. So we'll see how this plays out. I understand that it can be an intimidating message to judges in immigration cases. They probably want that message to be sent because there's another judge in Arizona that just got arrested earlier this week because he was actually harboring someone illegally in his house who the government claims is a member of Tren de Aragua. And they probably want to tell judges, like, look, it's one thing if you're a part of a sanctuary city and you're not going to help us. We're not going to like it. We're not going to be happy about it. But okay, that's one thing. We can't force you to cooperate. But if you actively impede us, we're going to consider that a crime. They have said this many times. And so we'll see how this case plays out. But either way, it does not warrant this hair on fire, melodramatic language that a lot of people quite counterproductively are giving it. All right, we're going to get to the Q&A in just a second. But before we do, here is a news story. Mexico extradites 29 drug traffickers to the U.S. to avoid trade tariffs. We all know how deceptive mainstream media can be. They push agendas, censor voices, and make sure you only see one side of the story. That's exactly why I started this show, because I believe in free speech and real conversations and the most open and unconstrained pursuit of the truth possible. It's also why I partnered with an app and website that believes in that too. Ground News prioritizes free speech over controlling the narrative. For every story, you can find all the articles reporting on it worldwide with context, like if a news source has any political bias, how credible they are, and if any major corporation is influencing their reporting. All I have to do is swipe through coverage with tags, their tags indicating if it's coming from a liberal or conservative source or from corporations or independent voices. And from there, I can decide for myself if, for example, Mexico's unprecedented extradition of 29 cartel members to the U.S. really is proof that Trump's tariff tactics are working, like some of his defenders claim, or if it's just a routine legal process and one of the cartel members pled not guilty anyway, and it's just an ordinary event between the two countries, as many center and left sources are insisting. Different sources are saying different things as usual. If I had just read one of these sources, I'd have a skewed view of reality, but with Ground News, I can put them side by side and decide for myself who's actually telling the truth. Ground News even created a dedicated feed called Blind Spot that exposes stories that either side of the political spectrum isn't reporting on, making it possible to spot stories the people in charge don't want you to see. Ground News is bringing back transparency in the news and civil discourse right from your phone or computer. Best of all, they're independent and subscriber supported. And they're offering my viewers 40% off the same exact Vantage plan that I use to get unlimited access to all of their features this month. So go to ground.news/GG, or scan the QR code to check them out. That's ground.news/GG for 40% off. If you like this show, very confident you will love that platform. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.